When you are new to cybersecurity, logging can feel like an endless sea of technical details. But at its core, logging is simply the record of what systems did and what happened to them. Centralizing logging means taking those records from many places, bringing them into a shared location, and making them usable for detection, investigation, and learning. The strategic part matters because it is tempting to say collect everything forever, yet that approach is expensive, messy, and often less useful than people expect. A good logging program chooses what to collect based on risk and value, understands why each category of data matters, and sets retention rules that balance investigation needs with cost and practicality. Centralization also helps because attacks rarely stay confined to one system, and you cannot understand a multi-step incident if your evidence is scattered across dozens of devices that rotate logs or get wiped. For beginners, it helps to think of centralized logging as building an organization-wide memory, one that can answer questions after something suspicious happens. The goal is not to admire how much data you have, but to make sure you can reconstruct meaningful stories when you need them most. To decide what to collect, you first need a mental model of the kinds of questions centralized logs should help you answer. You want to know who did something, what they did, when they did it, where it happened, and how it relates to other events in the environment. That means identity and authentication logs are important because they show logins, failures, and changes to accounts. System and security logs are important because they show process launches, configuration changes, and security-relevant events. Network-related logs are important because they show connections, requests, and potential data movement. Application logs are important because they show what software actually did from the perspective of the business process, such as access to records or changes to transactions. Finally, administrative and configuration logs are important because many attacks involve changing settings, disabling protections, or creating persistence. Beginners sometimes treat logging as one category, but it is really a set of lenses, and each lens reveals different parts of the same reality. Strategic collection is about ensuring you have the right lenses for your most important questions. The second part of what to collect is understanding that not every system produces equally valuable logs, and not every log source deserves the same level of attention. High-value systems, like identity services, sensitive databases, critical servers, and management platforms, tend to deserve richer logging because compromise there can have outsized impact. Endpoints produce huge volumes of events, and collecting everything from every endpoint may be unrealistic. So you often collect a targeted set of endpoint telemetry that supports detection and investigation without overwhelming storage. Network devices can provide evidence of communication paths and anomalies, but they can also generate enormous amounts of data, so you choose the fields and events that best support your detection goals. Cloud services can produce detailed audit trails, and those trails can be essential because cloud environments change quickly and are heavily API-driven, meaning changes can happen without anyone logging into a traditional server. For beginners, the key is that strategic logging is risk-based, not equal opportunity. You collect more detail where compromise would hurt most and where visibility is otherwise hard to get. That helps ensure your data budget is spent on security outcomes rather than on raw volume. Once you have a sense of what to collect, the why becomes clearer because the purpose of logs drives which specific events and fields matter. Centralized logging supports detection by allowing you to create alerts and patterns that span multiple systems, such as a suspicious login followed by privilege changes and then unusual data access. It supports investigation by allowing you to reconstruct timelines and understand what an attacker did, which systems were affected, and what evidence supports each conclusion. It supports compliance and accountability by providing records of access and changes, which can be important even outside of major security incidents. It supports operational learning by allowing teams to see where controls fail, where misconfigurations occur, and where processes need improvement. The beginner misconception here is that logging is only for catching hackers, but logging is also for catching mistakes, understanding failures, and proving that controls are working. In practice, many incidents involve a mix of accident and malice, and logs are the common evidence that helps you separate the two. The stronger your why, the easier it becomes to defend logging choices to stakeholders who worry about cost and complexity. A strategic logging program also recognizes that centralization changes what is possible because centralization enables correlation and context. If each system keeps its own logs locally, you might be able to see what happened on that system, but you may not easily see how it connects to a larger pattern. With centralized logging, you can link events across devices, users, and time, which is essential for detecting multi-stage attacks. Centralization also supports consistency, because you can normalize how events are labeled and stored, making searches and analysis more reliable. Another benefit is resilience, because logs stored only on the system that is compromised may be altered or deleted by an attacker, while centralized logs are harder to tamper with if designed well. For beginners, it helps to think of centralization as moving evidence out of the crime scene and into an evidence locker. That does not guarantee the evidence is perfect, but it increases the chance that evidence survives and can be used when it matters. This is why centralization is often considered a foundational security capability. The how long question, meaning retention, is where strategy becomes unavoidable because storage and processing costs can climb quickly. Retention is not simply choosing a number of days, because different log types have different value over time. Some logs are most valuable in the first hours and days because they support immediate detection and response, while other logs are valuable over months because investigations can begin late or because patterns emerge slowly. For example, authentication logs may be critical for investigating suspicious account activity weeks after the fact, and configuration change logs may be important for understanding when a risky setting was introduced. Retention also supports lessons learned, because you cannot analyze trends if you discard history too quickly. At the same time, keeping everything forever can become impractical and can increase the risk that sensitive information is stored longer than needed. A strategic approach sets retention based on risk, investigation needs, legal requirements, and cost constraints. For beginners, it is helpful to see retention as a resource decision, like how much shelf space your evidence locker has and which evidence you must keep. Retention strategy also benefits from thinking in tiers rather than a single retention rule applied to all logs. Some data may need to be quickly searchable for active monitoring, which means it should stay in a format that supports fast queries. Other data may be needed for long-term reference, but not daily searching, which means it can be stored more cheaply and accessed less frequently. Even without getting into tool specifics, the concept is that you can keep recent data hot and older data cold, while still preserving it. This tiered mindset helps you defend retention decisions because you can explain that you are balancing visibility with cost. It also helps you avoid the beginner mistake of assuming retention is all or nothing. Another retention consideration is data quality over time, because some logs lose context if supporting reference data is missing. For example, if user identifiers change or systems are renamed, older logs may become harder to interpret unless you retain mapping information. So strategic retention includes planning for the context needed to understand history, not just the raw events. Another foundational topic in centralized logging is deciding what level of detail to collect within each log source, because too little detail makes logs useless and too much detail makes them noisy and expensive. This is where understanding fields and context matters, even for beginners. For authentication logs, it is often valuable to capture the user, source, method, success, or failure, and any relevant factors like location or device. For system events, it is valuable to capture what executed, who executed it, how it started, and what it touched. For network events, it is valuable to capture who talked to whom, on what protocol, and with what outcome, such as allowed or blocked. For application events, it is valuable to capture which user performed which action on which object, because that ties technical activity to business activity. Beginners sometimes assume a log entry is either present or absent, but the difference between a helpful log and a frustrating log is often in these details. Strategic logging means selecting the details that will matter during an investigation when you are trying to prove or disprove a theory quickly. The cost of missing detail is often paid later, during an incident, when time and certainty are most valuable. Centralizing logs also introduces challenges around normalization and consistency, which is the process of making diverse log formats usable together. Different systems log events in different ways, with different names for similar concepts. One system might call a user identifier one thing, and another system might call it something else, and timestamps might be recorded in different formats. If you do not handle this, searching becomes unreliable and correlation becomes error-prone. For beginners, the key idea is that centralization is not only moving data, it is turning data into something you can ask questions of. That means paying attention to time synchronization, consistent host naming, and consistent identification of users and devices. It also means ensuring that critical fields are captured reliably and not dropped during collection. If you collect logs but cannot trust their timestamps or identities, your ability to reconstruct timelines becomes weak. Strategic logging, therefore, includes basic data hygiene, because clean data supports accurate decisions. Another strategic aspect is deciding how to handle sensitive information in logs, because logs can contain personal data, credentials, or confidential business information if you are not careful. For example, application logs might capture user actions that include sensitive fields, and debugging logs might accidentally record secrets. A mature logging strategy includes decisions about what should be masked, what should be limited, and who should have access to different types of logs. Access control is important because centralized logs become a powerful source of insight, which also makes them attractive to attackers. For beginners, it helps to see centralized logs as both a security tool and a security asset that must be protected. If an attacker gains access to centralized logs, they can learn how the environment works and what detections exist. So strategic logging includes protecting the logging pipeline and the stored data, as well as monitoring access to the logs themselves. This reinforces the idea that security controls often need their own security, because anything valuable can become a target. A final piece of strategy is setting expectations for how logs will be used, because collecting logs without a plan often leads to disappointment and waste. You should be able to explain which detections and investigations the logs support, and you should review whether the logs are actually being used for those purposes. If certain logs are expensive to collect and store but rarely used, it may be worth reconsidering their value or adjusting what is collected. Conversely, if investigations repeatedly stall due to missing logs, that is strong evidence that collection should be improved. This is why logging programs benefit from feedback loops, where incident reviews and detection reviews drive changes to what is collected and how long it is kept. For beginners, this is a key lesson. Logging strategy is not a one-time design. It is a living program that learns from experience. The best logging strategies are practical, evidence-driven, and aligned with how the organization actually responds to risk. When logging is designed this way, centralization becomes a force multiplier for detection, investigation, and trust. When you put it all together, centralizing logging strategically is about making deliberate choices that support real security outcomes. You decide what to collect by focusing on the questions you must be able to answer and the systems where visibility matters most. You clarify why you collect it by tying logs to detection, investigation, accountability, and continuous improvement, rather than collecting for its own sake. You decide how long to keep it by balancing investigation timelines, risk, and cost, often using retention tiers to keep recent data quickly accessible while preserving history. Along the way, you treat data quality, consistency, and protection of the log system as essential, because centralized evidence is only useful if it is trustworthy and secure. For a brand new learner, the most important takeaway is that logs are not just background noise from computers. Logs are the record of reality, and centralizing them strategically gives security the ability to see patterns, respond confidently, and learn over time. That ability is one of the strongest foundations a security program can build, because it turns uncertainty into evidence and evidence into action.
Thanks for listening. For more audio courses, daily newsletters, and more, please visit baremetalcyber.com.